Uh, Kindly explain what is Talfiq and uh, what it is, and is it even logical?
لا إله إلا الله محمد رسول الله.
Okay, so I'm going to keep this simple because a lot of people are not aware of this concept and we don't want to confuse them. Talfiq literally means, you can say, just combining issues, combining matters, legal rulings. And you have to understand that the schools of law, right, the four main schools of law in Orthodox Islam, the Hanafi, the Shafi'i, the Maliki, and the Hanbali schools, are based on sound and valid interpretations of the Quran and the Sunnah made by people who are qualified to do them. Not anyone, not just anyone can pick up the copy of the Quran and start deriving rulings. As I said in the class before this, even amongst the Sahaba, uh, who had mastery of such a mastery of the Arabic language that it's impossible for someone in our time to even, get close to their level of understanding. They uh, from over 124,000 of the Sahaba who were present at the final Hajj, and there were more. Uh, from over this figure, only 17, or I believe maybe 19, but 17, as far as I recall, mentioned in the book of Usul al-Fiqh, were people who were qualified to derive rulings directly from the Quran and the Sunnah. So a ruling which is derived is done so based on principles. And sometimes these principles, what happens is these principles are taken from an understanding of the Quran or the Sunnah, or a valid source of law. So the schools of law are based on these sets of principles. And so what happens if someone comes and starts saying, I will take this aspect from this thing, and then this aspect from this thing, and then this aspect from here, and add them all together, voila, I have my own ruling now. This is a problem. And generally, you can find situations where it's completely invalid. So for example, we have the ruling of a nikah, a marriage. And what is the difference between a nikah and a zina, right, which is haram in Islam, whereas a marriage in general is a sunnah muakkad, emphasize sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So a nikah is meant to be public. It's meant to be known, whereas zina is generally something that happens secretly and privately. So in the Hanafi school, you have to have witnesses. So at least two witnesses, for example. So you have to have witnesses for a valid nikah. So if someone sees them and say you're not married, and they can say no, we are, and look, there are witnesses. If it goes to court, the witness can step forward and say yes, they were married in front of us. So but in the school of Imam Malik, um, witnesses are not required, just making this thing known publicly, that's what's required. So, and I'm saying this as someone who's studied and trained in the Hanafi school. I don't know all of the nuances of the other schools. So how about someone who hasn't picked up a book of law and studied it with qualified teachers? Okay, so now in the Hanafi school, uh, giving a mahar is part of the contract, and it has to be a certain amount of money. And in the Shafi'i school, it's not the same. Either you have to give, either you don't have to give anything at all, or you have to give something, small. I have a friend. I have a friend who actually had the nerve. He said to his father-in-law to be that I've spoken to the lady and we've agreed that her mahar is going to be 3 dates. And the father-in-law to be was like taken aback, and he's like, 3 dates? So then he said, okay, but take her for Hajj as well. So the Hajj is also part of the mahar. He said, okay. Right? Otherwise, 3 days. Anyway, so then, um, what I'm saying is the conditions for just a valid nikah are different in each school. And so, uh, and if you do a valid nikah in one school, then it's accepted as a valid nikah. You don't need to worry about that. But then what if you have a group of a couple who don't have any witnesses, and they actually don't want nikah, they want sifah. It's opposite. So they go somewhere private, and maybe they'll tell to they'll say, okay, we'll make it public later. You don't have to have witnesses. So we'll just take that from the Hanafi school, ignore the rest of the conditions from the Shafi'i school. He doesn't give her any mahar, so the Hanafi school condition is gone. Here, I'll give you 3 dates, right? And they start mixing the rulings from one school to try and arrive to a sound, quote unquote, sound ruling. What they end up with is a mess, and it's not valid. And then they end up with, as people who have committed zina. So it's, and I've given a crude example, but there are a lot of what they call mafasid, a lot of problematic elements to this approach. And fiqh law is a specialization. It's a specialization. If someone, if my car started making a noise tomorrow, and I just, walk past someone on the street, oh, there's something wrong with your timing belt. I've just heard what a timing belt is, right? No idea where it's going to be found in the car, somewhere on the engine, I presume. And then I'm not going to go, yeah, it must be that. Okay, go on YouTube, how to change a timing belt, go buy a timing belt. I'm not going to try doing it myself, right? It's a specialization. So deriving rulings is also a specialization, and there are legal consequences to this. We have to stand before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and if you go and do something you're not qualified to do, especially if you lead other people off of course as well, you have to answer for that. So talfiq is an approach that is not encouraged, and it would be haram for someone to try and do this.
لا إله إلا الله محمد رسول الله.